My daughter has been missing for 37 years, and I know exactly what took her. I told the police, I told the FBI, I told every search and rescue volunteer, every journalist, every skeptic who knocked on my door with their tape recorders and their pity. They all looked at me the same way, like I was a man who had snapped under the weight of grief, like losing a child had broken something in my brain that made me reach for fairy tales instead of facing the truth. But I know what I saw that night on Grandfather Mountain. I know what dragged my little girl into the darkness of the Blue Ridge. And after 37 years of being called crazy, of being investigated as a suspect in my own daughter's disappearance, of losing my wife, my job, my reputation, and nearly my life to the bottle and the grief, I am done being silent. I am 74 years old. I do not have much time left. And before I go, the world is going to hear the truth, whether it wants to or not. My name is Dale Everett Crenshaw. I live alone in a cabin outside Blowing Rock, North Carolina, about 4 miles from the spot where my daughter Lily Rose Crenshaw vanished on the night of October 17th, 1987. She was 7 years old. She had brown hair that curled at the ends no matter how many times her mother brushed it straight. She weighed 46 pounds. She was wearing a purple corduroy jacket with a small daisy patch her grandmother had sewn onto the left sleeve, blue jeans and white canvas sneakers from Sears that cost $11 and still had red clay on the toes from a puddle she had jumped in earlier that day. I remember every detail because I have lived inside that day for almost 4 decades. I have replayed every hour, every minute, every second, looking for the moment I could have done something different, looking for the choice that would have kept my daughter alive instead of whatever happened to her in those mountains. But to understand what took Lily, you need to understand where it happened, and you need to understand what the mountains of western North Carolina really are beneath the tourist brochures and the leaf-peeping season and the little mountain towns that sell fudge and dulcimers and rocking chairs to folks from Florida. The Blue Ridge Mountains are among the oldest mountains on Earth. Geologists estimate them at over 1 billion years old, which means they were ancient before the Appalachians even finished forming, before the Rockies existed, before the Himalayas were a ripple in the crust. These mountains have watched continents drift apart and collide again. They have been taller than Everest and worn down to what you see now. Those soft green ridges that roll across the horizon like the spine of something sleeping. But they are not gentle. That softness is a disguise. Beneath the rhododendron thickets and the morning fog and the waterfalls that the tourists take pictures of with their disposable Kodak cameras, there are hollows so deep and tangled that sunlight never reaches the ground. There are caves that have never been mapped. There are forests where the Cherokee refused to hunt, not because the game was scarce, but because they believed something lived there that was older than their oldest stories, something that did not want to be found, something that punished those who wandered too close. I grew up hearing those stories. My father, Roy Crenshaw, was a third-generation logger who worked the mountains around Watauga County his whole life. He was born in 1921 and started swinging an axe when he was 14 years old. He was not a superstitious man. He believed in hard work, black coffee, the Baptist church, and listening to Carolina Tar Heels basketball on the radio. But there were places in those mountains he would not go. And when I was old enough to ask why, he told me something I dismissed for 30 years and now cannot stop thinking about. "There are things in these woods that were here before us, Dale," he said one evening on the porch of the house I grew up in, a sweating bottle of cheerwine in his hand because my mother did not allow beer. My grandfather saw one once back around 1908 or 1909 up near Roan Mountain. Said it was taller than any man and covered in dark hair, and it stank like something dead 3 days in August. Said it watched him from the laurel thicket and he could feel it hating him. Not angry the way a bear gets angry. Hateful, the way something that resents your existence gets hateful. Like you had no right being there. Like you were trespassing on something sacred and it was deciding whether to let you leave. Granddad never went back to that section of timber. Said whatever lived up there would kill a man for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it would not lose a second of sleep over it. I was maybe 12 when he told me that, which would have been around 1962. I remember thinking it was just an old mountain story, the kind that gets passed around like moonshine at family reunions. Every family in Appalachia has a story about something terrible in the woods. Panther screams that sound like women crying. Lights on the ridges that nobody can explain. People who walk into the hollows and never walk out. You grow up with these stories and you learn to file them somewhere between entertainment and superstition. You do not take them seriously, not until you have to. I married Karen McBride in the spring of 1978. She was from Lenoir, a school teacher at Blowing Rock Elementary, the kindest person I have ever known. We bought 7 acres outside Blowing Rock and I built us a house with my own hands. Carpentry and general contracting were my trade, same as my father before me and his father before him. The property backed up against the Pisgah National Forest, and from our back porch you could see the ridge of Grandfather Mountain cutting the sky like a serrated knife. The Blue Ridge Parkway ran along the mountain about 3 miles from our front door, and in autumn the whole world seemed to turn gold and crimson from our kitchen window. Lily was born on March 7, 1980, at Watauga Medical Center in Boone. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She came into the world screaming and did not stop being loud for the next 7 years. She was fearless in a way that terrified her mother and delighted me. She climbed everything: trees, fences, the roof of our tool shed. She once caught a black rat snake in the yard with her bare hands and carried it to the kitchen to show Karen, who dropped a casserole dish and screamed so loud the neighbor's dog started howling. She loved the woods the way I did, the way my father did, the way every Crenshaw had going back generations. From the time she could walk, she wanted to be outside. I taught her to identify trees by their bark and leaves: tulip poplar, white oak, sugar maple, Fraser fir. She knew them all by the time she was 5. I taught her animal tracks: deer, raccoon, black bear, wild turkey. She would crouch in the mud with a magnifying glass she got from a cereal box and study each print like a detective examining evidence at a crime scene. But there was something about Lily that I noticed and chose to ignore, something that, looking back, should have been a warning. She was afraid of the woods at night, not the normal fear that children have of the dark. This was specific. She would stand at the window of her bedroom, which faced the tree line behind our house, and stare into the darkness with an expression that no 7-year-old should wear, an expression of recognition, of something she could not put into words, but that she felt in her bones the way animals feel a coming storm. "Daddy," she said to me one evening in September 1987, about a month before she disappeared, "something watches me from the trees at night. Something big." I knelt down beside her and looked out the window. The tree line was maybe 40 yards from the house, a wall of hemlock and rhododendron backlit by the last glow of sunset. I did not see anything. The katydids were singing their end of summer chorus. A whippoorwill called from somewhere near the creek. Normal sounds, normal evening. "There is nothing out there, sweetheart," I said. "Just deer and raccoons, maybe a possum." "It is not a possum," she said. Her voice was flat, certain, the voice of someone reporting a fact, not sharing a fear. "It is big and it smells bad and it stands behind the trees where you cannot see it, but I can feel it looking at me. It does not like me, Daddy. It does not like any of us." I told her it was her imagination. I told her there was nothing in those woods that could hurt her. I told her she was safe. I kissed her forehead and tucked her into bed and read her a chapter of Charlotte's Web and told her I loved her and turned on the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon that she had picked out herself at the hardware store in Boone. I was wrong about all of it. October 1987 was one of those Appalachian autumns that makes the rest of the country jealous. The mountains were on fire with color, gold and crimson and orange, so intense it looked artificial, like someone had taken a paintbrush to the ridgelines. The temperatures were perfect, mid-50s during the day, low 40s at night. Ronald Reagan was in the White House. The stock market had been falling all week, losing ground every day, and the newspapers were full of talk about whether the whole economy was about to collapse. 2 days after our camping trip, the market would crash on what they called Black Monday, the biggest single-day drop in Wall Street history, but we did not know that yet. All we knew was that my clients had started canceling renovation projects. Money was getting tight. Karen and I had argued about finances that week, nothing serious, just the low-grade tension that creeps into a marriage when the checking account gets thin. We had planned a family camping trip to Julian Price Memorial Park, a campground right off the Blue Ridge Parkway near the base of Grandfather Mountain. It was a trip we made every October, our little family tradition. We could not afford a real vacation that year, not with the economy going sideways, but camping cost almost nothing and we already had the gear. Karen made it special every year with her famous chili recipe and cornbread baked in a cast iron skillet over the fire. Lily usually looked forward to it for weeks, but this year was different. When I told her about the trip, she went quiet. She did not argue. She did not say she did not want to go. But she stopped eating her mashed potatoes and stared at her plate and finally said, in that same flat voice that made my skin prickle, "Do we have to camp near the mountain?" I did not understand the question. We always camped near the mountain. That was the whole point. I told her it would be fun, that we would make s'mores and tell stories, and she could look for salamanders in the creek the way she always did. She nodded and said okay, and did not mention it again. But the night before we left, I found her standing at her bedroom window again, staring at the dark tree line with that expression on her face. The crescent moon nightlight glowed behind her, and her reflection in the glass looked like a ghost of herself, transparent, already half gone. When I came in to say goodnight, she hugged me so tightly that I could feel her heartbeat through her pajamas, rapid and hard, like a rabbit's. "I love you, Daddy," she said. "I love you so much." It was the way she said it that should have stopped me, not the way a child says goodnight, the way someone says goodbye. We packed our gear on Friday, October 16th. I loaded the truck, a 1981 Ford F-150 that I had bought, used from a lot in Lenoir, with our canvas tent, sleeping bags, a Coleman camp stove, a cooler full of food packed in ice we bought from the gas station for $1.50 a bag, flashlights with those big square batteries, a bundle of firewood from the stack behind the house, and all the other necessities. We did not have fancy gear, no Gore-Tex, no high-tech anything. This was 1987. You camped with what you had, and what we had was sturdy, simple, and well-used. We arrived at the campground around 3 in the afternoon on Saturday, October 17th, and set up at Site 47, a spot tucked back against a stand of yellow birches near Price Lake. There were maybe a dozen other campers scattered across the area, most of them retirees in RVs, enjoying the fall color. The season was winding down, and our section felt private, almost too quiet. Lily helped me set up the tent, but her heart was not in it. She kept looking over her shoulder toward the mountain, toward the dense forest that climbed the slope above the campground. At one point, she stopped what she was doing and stood perfectly still, her head tilted slightly, listening to something I could not hear. The sun was behind her, and her shadow stretched long and thin across the campsite, reaching toward the tree line like it was trying to warn her. "What is it, Lily?" She did not answer for a few seconds. Then she said, "It knows we are here." Karen and I exchanged glances. Karen mouthed the word imagination and smiled, and I nodded and went back to pounding tent stakes into the hard October ground with a rubber mallet. But something cold had settled in my stomach, something that would not leave. We ate dinner around the campfire as the sun went down. Karen made her chili and cornbread. Lily ate one bowl but did not ask for seconds, which was unusual for a girl who normally had an appetite twice her size. She was quiet through the meal, responding to questions but not initiating conversation. The radio in the truck was tuned to WATA out of Boone, and Hank Williams Jr. was singing about a country boy surviving, and normally Lily would have been singing along because she knew every word. But she just sat there, staring at the fire, not looking at the woods. When the sun went down and the darkness crept in from the tree line like a tide, she moved her camp chair closer to mine, close enough that our arms were touching. She stared at the fire and did not look at the forest and did not sing. There was a smell that evening, faint at first, carried on a breeze that came down from the mountain. It was not the normal smell of the forest, not pine and earth and decomposing leaves. This was something else, something rank and biological, like rotting meat mixed with wet animal hide and ammonia. I noticed it around 7:30. Karen wrinkled her nose and said something about a dead deer nearby. I agreed because the alternative was not something I was willing to consider. I had grown up in these mountains. I had smelled bear, I had smelled fox dens and coyote kills, and every foul thing the forest could produce. This was none of those. This was something I had never encountered, a scent that triggered a response in the deepest part of my brain, the part that was still an animal, still capable of recognizing a predator by scent alone. But Lily knew. She went rigid when the smell arrived. Her small hand found mine and squeezed. And when I looked down at her face in the firelight, I saw an expression that will haunt me until the day I die. She was terrified, not the theatrical fear of a child who has heard a scary noise, the paralyzed, silent terror of a prey animal that knows a predator is close and that running will only make it worse. "Daddy," she whispered, "it is here." We put her to bed around 8:30. She did not want to sleep. She begged to stay by the fire. She begged to sleep in the truck. She begged us to drive home. Karen and I chalked it up to general nervousness about camping in the dark and the unfamiliar sounds of the forest at night. We gently insisted she get in her sleeping bag. She did, reluctantly. I read her a chapter of Charlotte's Web, the same book we had been working through all month. She fell asleep before I finished the page, but her sleep was restless. She twitched and murmured, and once she said a word that sounded like no, drawn out like a moan, like she was refusing something in a dream, like something was reaching for her in the dark place behind her eyelids, and she was trying to push it away. Karen and I stayed up for another hour. The radio played country music and we talked about nothing important. Christmas plans, whether we could afford to replace the washing machine that had been making that grinding noise. Normal life. The smell had faded, or maybe we had gotten used to it, and the forest had settled into its usual nighttime sounds. Owls, insects, the distant murmur of the creek feeding Price Lake. A bullfrog bellowed from somewhere along the shore. I convinced myself everything was fine. I banked the fire, secured the cooler in the truck bed, and bungeed the lid down against raccoons, checked the tent, and crawled into my sleeping bag beside my family. I fell asleep listening to Lily breathing, that small, steady rhythm that every parent knows, the sound that means your child is safe and the world is right and nothing can touch the life you have built. I woke up at 2:14 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my Timex watch by flashlight, the same Timex my father had given me for my 30th birthday. What woke me was not a sound. It was the absence of sound. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no owls, no frogs, no wind. The kind of silence that is not natural. The kind of silence that means every living thing in the area has detected something that terrifies it into absolute stillness. The kind of silence that means death is close, and everything with the instinct to recognize it has either fled or frozen. And the smell was back, stronger than before. So strong it seemed to press against the canvas walls of the tent, like a physical force. My eyes watered. My stomach lurched. It was the smell of something alive and foul, something that had been living in darkness and filth, something that was very, very close. Close enough that when I held my breath and listened, I could hear breathing outside the tent. Not Karen's breathing, not an animal's breathing, something deeper, wetter, a slow, deliberate intake of air through nostrils that were pressed close to the canvas, scenting us the way a bloodhound scents a trail, tasting us on the air. I reached for my flashlight. My hand was shaking. It took me 3 tries to find the button and turn it on. The beam cut through the tent's interior, and what I saw made the blood drain from my face so fast I nearly passed out. Lily's sleeping bag was not just empty, it was torn. The canvas and flannel lining had been ripped open from the outside, shredded along a line that ran from the collar to the waist. The edges of the tear were ragged, pulled apart by something with enormous strength, not cut, not unzipped. Ripped, the way you might tear a paper bag, except this was heavy canvas designed to withstand years of mountain camping. And on the fabric, on the ruined sleeping bag where my daughter had been lying minutes or hours before, there were stains, dark stains that in the white beam of my flashlight looked black, but that I knew with a certainty that made my heart stop beating for what felt like 3 full seconds, were red. Karen, I could barely form the word. Karen, wake up. Lily is gone. What happened next was chaos. Karen screaming, me ripping open the tent flap, the flashlight beam swinging wildly across the campsite. And what I saw outside that tent is something I have never fully described to anyone, because every time I have tried, the words come out wrong and people look at me like I am insane. The ground around our tent was destroyed. Deep impressions in the soft earth, massive footprints at least 16 inches long pressed into the soil with a force that suggested something weighing 600 or 700 pounds. They were everywhere, circling the tent, approaching from the tree line and leading away from the tent toward the forest in a straight line that told me exactly what had happened. But it was not just the footprints. There were drag marks, 2 parallel grooves in the dirt, starting at the back of the tent where the canvas had been torn from the outside, leading across the campsite toward the trees. The grooves were spaced about 18 inches apart, the width of a small child's body being pulled across the ground. And there was blood. Not a river of it, but drops. A trail of dark drops on the leaves and dirt, following the drag marks, following the massive footprints, leading into the darkness of the forest, into the mountain, into whatever waited up there in the hollows and the laurel hills and the places where no human being had any business going. I ran. I did not think. I did not plan. I did not grab my boots or a weapon or anything except that flashlight and the desperate animal knowledge that my daughter was out there and something had her, and every second I wasted was a second she did not have. I ran barefoot after those tracks, plunging into the tree line, into rhododendron so thick I had to tear branches aside with my bare hands. Thorns raked my arms and face. Roots caught my feet and sent me sprawling. I fell, tasted blood and dirt, got up, fell again, kept running. Karen was behind me, screaming Lily's name into the darkness. But I was faster. The drag marks led uphill, steep uphill, into terrain that would have been difficult to navigate in daylight and was nearly impossible in the dark, with nothing but a Rayovac flashlight that kept flickering when I smacked it against branches. But whatever had taken Lily was not slowed by the terrain. The stride between the footprints grew longer as the slope increased, as if the thing was gaining speed, running uphill through dense mountain forest, with my daughter at a pace that no human could match. Running the way something runs when it is returning to its den with food. I followed for maybe a quarter mile before the tracks reached a rocky section of exposed granite where the soil gave way to stone. And there they stopped. No more footprints. No more drag marks. No more blood. Just cold rock and darkness, and the sound of my own ragged breathing echoing off the cliff face above me, and the pounding of my heart, and the distant fading sound of Karen screaming our daughter's name from somewhere below. I searched for 3 hours. I covered every inch of that mountainside I could reach in the dark, crawling over rocks, pushing through thickets that tore my clothes and skin, screaming Lily's name until my voice was nothing but a raw whisper that the mountains swallowed without echo. I listened for any sound, a cry, a whimper, anything that might tell me my daughter was alive somewhere in that darkness, but the forest was silent. Whatever had taken her had vanished into the mountain as completely as if the rock itself had opened up and swallowed them and closed again behind. At 4:47 in the morning, I drove to the ranger station at the Blue Ridge Parkway entrance. I was barefoot, bleeding from dozens of cuts, covered in mud and thorns and shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. A ranger named Howard Jessup opened the door in his undershirt and found a man who looked like he had crawled out of a grave. "My daughter is missing," I said. "Something took her from our tent in the night. Something ripped through the sleeping bag and dragged her into the forest. There are tracks, huge tracks, and there is blood." End part 1. The search began within 2 hours of my report. Watauga County Sheriff's Department, Blue Ridge Parkway Rangers, North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. By noon on October 18, 1987, search and rescue teams from 3 counties had arrived with tracking dogs, grid maps, and a Bell helicopter on loan from the Highway Patrol. Volunteers flooded in from Boone, Blowing Rock, Banner Elk, and as far as Asheville. Some drove up from Charlotte. By the end of that first day, over 200 people were combing the mountain for my daughter. They found nothing. The dogs tracked Lily's scent from the tent to the tree line, then lost it at the same rocky area where I had lost the tracks. The helicopter flew grid patterns over Grandfather Mountain for 3 days. The pilot and observer scanning the terrain through binoculars while the rotor wash scattered the autumn leaves from the canopy. Ground teams covered every trail, every drainage, every ridgeline within a 10-mile radius. Divers searched Price Lake despite my telling them she had been taken uphill, not toward the water. Spelunkers from the local grotto club checked every known cave opening in the area. Nothing. No clothing, no remains, no evidence that a 7-year-old girl had gone any further than those rocks where the trail went cold. The forensic team documented the torn sleeping bag, the footprints, the drag marks, and the blood trail. Lab analysis at the SBI crime lab in Raleigh confirmed the blood was Lily's. Type B positive, matching her medical records from Watauga Medical Center. The footprints were measured at 17 inches long and 7.5 inches wide. 5 toe impressions. No claws. Bipedal stride of approximately 5.5 feet, increasing to nearly 7 feet as the tracks moved uphill. The forensic examiner noted that the force required to tear the sleeping bag canvas in the manner observed would exceed what any human could produce, bare-handed. The fabric had not been cut, it had been ripped, pulled apart by something with grip strength that the examiner compared to industrial machinery. Detective Raymond Holt from the Watauga County Sheriff's Department was assigned as lead investigator. He was a serious man, mid-50s with a crew cut and hands like catcher's mitts, and the kind of mountain accent that told you His people had been in these hills as long as mine. He interviewed me for the first time on the morning of October 18th, about 8 hours after I had reported Lily missing. We sat in the ranger station break room with a pot of burnt coffee between us and the sound of helicopters overhead. Mr. Crenshaw walked me through the evening again. Every detail. I told him everything: the drive up, setting up camp, dinner, putting Lily to bed, going to sleep, waking up, the silence, the smell, the torn sleeping bag, the blood, the tracks, the drag marks. "You mentioned unusual tracks near the tent," Holt said, his pen pausing over his notepad. "Can you describe them?" "Large footprints, at least 16 inches long, humanoid, 5 toes, no claws, deep impressions like something very heavy. They were right next to the drag marks, heading toward the tree line and up the mountain." "And what do you think made those tracks, Mr. Crenshaw?" I hesitated. I knew how it would sound. I knew what would happen the moment the words left my mouth. This was 1987. People still talked about the Patterson-Gimlin film from '67. Bigfoot was a punchline, a tabloid headline, something for the National Enquirer between stories about alien babies and Elvis sightings. But my daughter was missing, and the truth was all I had. "I think it was a Bigfoot," I said. "I think a Sasquatch took my daughter." The room went quiet. Holt stared at me. The other officer present, a young deputy named Collins who had been taking notes, put his pen down and looked at me like I had just confessed to a crime. "Mr. Crenshaw," Holt said carefully, "I understand you are under extreme stress right now. When a child goes missing, parents sometimes grasp at explanations that—" "I am not grasping at anything," I interrupted. "I saw the tracks. They were not human. They were not bear. I grew up in these mountains. My father was a logger for 40 years, his father before him. I know what bear tracks look like. I know what every animal in these woods leaves behind when it walks. And those tracks were not from any animal I have ever seen. They were bipedal. They were enormous. And they led away from my daughter's blood." Holt wrote something in his notebook. His face showed nothing. Then he asked me where I had been between 10 at night and 2 in the morning. And there it was, the moment I went from desperate father to suspect. I passed 2 polygraph examinations administered by the SBI. I submitted to 3 separate interrogations, each lasting over 4 hours, conducted in the Watauga County Sheriff's Department, a cinder block building on King Street in Boone that smelled like floor wax and stale cigarette smoke. I provided blood samples, hair samples, fingerprints. I gave them permission to search my house, my truck, my workshop. They went through everything, our finances, our phone records, which in 1987 meant calling the phone company and requesting paper logs of every call made from our line. They interviewed our neighbors, our friends, Karen's colleagues at the school, my clients, the man who sold me lumber, the woman who cut my hair, the pastor at our church. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. But the damage was done. The story hit the local papers first. The Watauga Democrat ran it on the front page. "Girl missing near Parkway" was the first headline. Within 2 days, it had been picked up by the Charlotte Observer, the Raleigh News and Observer, and the regional AP Wire. And by the end of that first week, the angle had shifted from missing child to the angle that would define and destroy the rest of my life. "Father claims Bigfoot took daughter." That headline ran in papers across the state and then across the country. It showed up in the tabloids. The National Enquirer put it on their cover beside a story about Nostradamus predicting the end of the world. A Current Affair sent a camera crew to Blowing Rock. People I had never met appeared on television discussing whether I was delusional, criminal, or both. I became a joke, a punchline, the Bigfoot dad. Karen tried to stand by me. She told reporters that she had seen the tracks. that the sleeping bag had been torn in a way no human could replicate, that the blood was real and the evidence was real and her husband was telling the truth. But the pressure was relentless. Friends stopped calling. Clients canceled jobs. Someone spray-painted the word killer on our garage door in red paint that dripped down the wood like blood. Someone left a note in our mailbox that said, "We know what you did to that little girl." Our pastor, a man named Reverend Tate, who had baptized Lily as an infant, came to our house and sat in our living room and gently suggested that my public statements about Bigfoot were causing disruption in the congregation, and perhaps we should take some time away from services. Karen left on Valentine's Day, 1988, 4 months after Lily disappeared, not because she blamed me. She told me that standing in the kitchen with her suitcase by the door, her eyes red and swollen, wearing the same blue dress she had worn on our first date 9 years earlier. She said she could not stay in a house where every room echoed with Lily's absence. She could not live in a town that had already convicted me in the court of public opinion. She could not sleep in a bed 20 feet from a room with a purple comforter and stuffed animals and a crescent moon nightlight that would never be switched on again. I understood. I did not fight it. The divorce was finalized in the summer of 1989. The last time I saw Karen was in the courthouse parking lot in Boone. She hugged me and said she was sorry. I said I was sorry. We held each other like two people drowning who know they cannot save each other, only go under together or let go. We let go. She moved to Raleigh to live with her sister. I heard years later that she remarried, a good man, an accountant. I hope he made her happy. I hope she found some kind of peace. She deserved it more than anyone I have ever known. After Karen left, I came apart. I will not dress it up or make it sound noble. I drank wild turkey for breakfast. I stopped working. I stopped eating regularly. I lost 30 pounds in 3 months. I sat on the back porch with my Remington 700 across my knees, staring at the tree line, waiting for something to come out of those woods so I could put a bullet in it. Because whatever had taken my daughter was still out there. I could feel it. Some nights I could smell it, that same rank biological stench drifting down from the mountain on the evening breeze. And some nights I heard sounds, deep, guttural vocalizations that came from the ridgeline above my property. Not coyotes, not owls, something else entirely. A sound that seemed to announce itself, taunting me, daring me to come into the dark. I almost did. More than once in those bourbon-soaked months of late 1988, I almost walked into those woods at night with my rifle and my rage and my broken heart. But something stopped me every time. Not fear, not rationality, something deeper. The certainty that whatever was out there wanted me to come. That the sounds and the smell were bait. That the darkness of those hollows was a mouth, and if I walked in, it would close around me and I would join my daughter in whatever place she had gone. The official search was called off in December 1987. The case remained open but inactive, cold. Lily became a name in a file cabinet in the Watauga County Sheriff's Department, a face on a fading poster tacked to the corkboard at the Exxon station on Highway 321. But I did not stop. I could not stop. Not because I believed she was still alive. The blood evidence, the violence of the abduction, the passage of time, all pointed to the worst conclusion. But I needed to find her remains. I needed to bring her home, even if home meant a pine box and a plot beside my mother at Cove Creek Baptist Church. And I needed to understand what had taken her. I needed to know what it was, where it lived, and whether it would do it again. I started going into the mountains systematically, every weekend, sometimes every day, which was easy because I had no clients left and nothing to do but drink and search. I mapped the area where the tracks had been found and expanded outward in concentric circles, covering new ground each trip. I bought a decent camera, a Pentax K1000 that I could afford because everything else was falling apart, and I bought plaster of Paris from the hardware store for casting impressions. I carried my Remington everywhere and a .44 caliber Ruger Blackhawk revolver on my hip. What I found over the next several years fundamentally changed my understanding of what lived in those mountains, and none of it was comforting. I found the territorial markers first: urine deposits on tree trunks at heights of 7 to 9 feet, too high for any black bear, thick, pungent, applied with the deliberation of a predator marking the boundaries of its hunting ground. I found the structures next: trees broken at heights of 8 to 10 feet, their trunks snapped and twisted by something with strength beyond anything in the wildlife manuals. The breaks formed lines, barriers across game trails and creek crossings, funneling movement, channeling prey. And then, in February 1990, 2.5 years after Lily disappeared, I found the bones. I was hiking a remote drainage about 4 miles northwest of the campsite, a place so deep in the backcountry that the only way in was 3 hours of bushwhacking through laurel thickets that would shred your clothes and your skin in equal measure. I was following a creek bed when I saw it, a bone lying in the shallow water, wedged between 2 rocks, yellow-white, weathered about the length of my forearm. My hands began to shake before my mind had fully processed what I was looking at. It was a femur, a human femur, small, the femur of a child. I sat down in that creek bed and held the bone in my hands, and the world went white. Not because I fainted, because grief has a color, and it is the color of nothing, the color of every possibility collapsing into the single worst reality. I called the sheriff's department from the payphone at the ranger station 2 hours later, soaking wet from the creek and shaking from something that had nothing to do with cold. Deputy Collins, who had been a young man during the initial search and was now a senior deputy, drove out to meet me. The forensic team recovered 12 bones over 3 days: a femur, 3 ribs, a scapula, several vertebrae, fragments of a pelvis, and a portion of a skull. DNA analysis took 8 weeks. In 1990, forensic DNA testing was not what it is today. The technology was newer, slower, less certain. I waited those 8 weeks in a state of suspension that was neither living nor dying, just existing in the space between hope and its absence. The results came back on April 22nd, 1990. The remains were not Lily's. They belonged to a man named Curtis Wayne Felton, age 41, a long-haul trucker from Knoxville, Tennessee, who had been reported missing in November 1984, 3 years before Lily was taken. His rig had been found at a truck stop off Interstate 40 near the North Carolina line. His wallet, thermos, and CB radio were still in the cab. The case had gone cold within weeks. Felton had been a hiker. His wife told the Tennessee investigators he would pull off at trailheads when he had time between loads. He had been hiking alone in the Pisgah National Forest when he vanished. His body, or what was left of it, had ended up 4 miles from the nearest trail in a drainage that required hours of brutal bushwhacking to reach. And the condition of the bones told a story that made the medical examiner in Raleigh go very quiet for a very long time. The bones showed perimortem fractures consistent with extreme blunt force trauma. The ribs had been broken inward, suggesting compression of the chest. The skull fragment showed crushing force applied to the temporal region. The femur had spiral fractures, the kind that occur when a long bone is twisted with tremendous rotational force while the victim is still alive. And there were marks on several of the bones, parallel grooves in the cortical surface, not tooth marks from scavenging animals, not tool marks, something else. Impressions made by something with broad, flat surfaces and enormous pressure, like fingertips, like something had gripped the bones hard enough to engrave itself into the hardest tissue in the human body. Curtis Wayne Felton had been killed by something that crushed his chest, twisted his leg until the bone spiraled apart, and cracked his skull with a single catastrophic blow. And he had been carried miles into the wilderness and discarded in a drainage where no one would have found him in 100 years if a grieving father had not been crawling through every hollow on the mountain looking for his daughter. Over the next 8 years, from 1990 to 1998, I found more remains, 7 more people, 7 sets of bones scattered across the Grandfather Mountain and Pisgah Forest backcountry, always in the most remote terrain, always in areas where I had documented the territorial markers and the broken tree lines, always showing the same pattern of catastrophic violence. I reported each discovery to the authorities. Each time, the forensic analysis told the same story: blunt force trauma, crushing injuries, bones marked by something with hands, not claws. Victims who had been solo hikers, hunters, or campers who had ventured alone into areas where they should not have been. I found the remains of 7 people in those 8 years. Combined with Lily and Curtis Felton, that was 9 people who had vanished in one stretch of the western North Carolina mountains over approximately 15 years. Their disappearances had been attributed to falls, exposure, animal attacks, or simply marked unsolved and filed away. No one had connected them because no one was looking for a pattern. No one except a broken carpenter from Blowing Rock that the whole state thought was out of his mind. I compiled everything into a report, 93 pages, maps showing the locations of remains, territorial markers, tree structures, and footprints, photographs taken with my Pentax, developed at the 1-hour photo counter at the Eckards in Boone, where the teenage clerk never asked why a man was printing pictures of bones and giant footprints, plaster casts of tracks, a timeline of disappearances cross-referenced with seasonal patterns, showing the creature was most active in the autumn and winter when food became scarce at higher elevations. I brought the report to Detective Holt in the spring of 1999. He was near retirement by then, gray-haired and tired, but he read every page in his office while I sat across from him in a chair that wobbled on the linoleum floor. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked at me with an expression I had never seen from him before. It was not belief. It was the death of certainty. "Mr. Crenshaw," he said carefully, "I pulled the missing persons records for Western North Carolina going back to 1960. There are 51 unsolved disappearances in the Grandfather Mountain and Pisgah Forest region. 51 people who walked into those mountains and were never found. That is not a normal number, not for an area this size, not by a long shot." He leaned forward. "I am not saying I believe your theory, but something is killing people in those mountains, and your documentation is the most thorough record of it I have ever seen." Holt took my report to the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation before he retired. The SBI sent 2 agents to interview me in the summer of 1999. They were professional, thorough, and absolutely refused to use the word Bigfoot. They called it an unidentified predatory subject. In September of 2000, the SBI organized a field operation in the Grandfather Mountain backcountry. 12 agents, 3 wildlife biologists from NC State, and a forensic specialist. They asked me to guide them into the areas where I had found remains and documented activity. I agreed on the condition that I was armed. We spent 11 days in those mountains. On the 7th night, at approximately 4,500 feet elevation in a hollow I had identified as the center of the creature's range, something found us. It started with the smell. Around midnight, that stench rolled into camp like poison gas. Every agent noticed it immediately. Then the vocalizations began. A deep, resonant call from the ridge above us. Then a second call from the east. Then a third from the south. 3 sources, a triangle around our position. "They are surrounding us," I told the team leader, an SBI agent named Vickers. This is what they do. Pack hunting. We are in the kill zone right now. What happened over the next 45 minutes was recorded on the SBI's infrared cameras. 3 massive bipedal figures moving through the forest around our camp. Thermal signatures indicating body masses of 500 to 700 pounds. Coordinated movement, probing advances. When one of the younger agents panicked and fired 2 rounds into the darkness, the response was instantaneous. Roaring from 3 directions, trees being snapped and pushed over in a circle around us, rocks hurled from the darkness, some weighing 40 pounds or more, impacting the ground close enough to spray dirt on our boots. A display of coordinated retaliatory fury that lasted 15 minutes and left the forest around our camp looking like a bomb had gone off. I want to tell you about what happened during those 15 minutes that did not make it into any official report. While the trees crashed and the rocks flew and the roaring shook the ground beneath our boots, one of the creatures stopped at the edge of the clearing. I saw it on the infrared monitor. It stood there for perhaps 20 seconds, motionless, while the other 2 continued the assault from different directions, and in its arms held against its massive chest, the way a person holds a bundle of firewood, was something pale, something small, something that was not covered in fur. I stared at that infrared image, and my heart stopped. The shape was approximately 3 feet long. The proportions were wrong for a log or a deer carcass. The way the creature held it was deliberate, displayed toward our camp, making sure we could see. This was not random. This was a message. This is what we do. This is what happens here. Leave or join them. Agent Vickers saw the same image. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said a word. The creature retreated with the others 20 minutes later. At dawn, we searched the area where it had been standing. We found only footprints, 18 inches long, pressed into the earth with the weight of something that carries the dead the way we carry nothing. One of the wildlife biologists, a man who had spent 20 years studying predatory behavior in large carnivores, resigned from the consulting team 2 days after we evacuated. He told me privately that what he had witnessed exceeded anything in his experience. "These are not animals in any sense I understand the word," he said. "They are strategic, they are patient, they are vindictive, they coordinate, they communicate, and they are unambiguously, absolutely dangerous to human life." He asked me not to use his name. I have honored that request for 24 years. I also want to say something about the other families. In the years since Lily was taken, I have made contact with the families of every person whose remains I found in those mountains. I sat in their living rooms and kitchens and told them what I had discovered. I showed them the evidence. I watched their faces go through the same progression mine did. Disbelief, then anger, then a grief so deep it has no floor. Curtis Felton's wife, Donna, lives in a small house outside Knoxville. When I found her in 1991, her boys were in elementary school. They are grown men now with families of their own. When I told Donna what I believed happened to Curtis, she sat at her kitchen table for a long time without speaking. Then she said something I have carried with me every day since. She said, "I always knew it was not an accident. Curtis knew those woods better than he knew our driveway. He would not have just gotten lost. Something took him from us, and the world told me to accept that he was gone and move on. But a wife knows. A wife always knows." There was a mother in Greensboro whose son, a 26-year-old biology student named Michael Odom, disappeared while doing fieldwork in Pisgah in 1992. I found his remains in 1995. When I brought her his class ring, which I had recovered from the creek bed where his bones lay scattered, she held it against her lips and closed her eyes and said, "God bless you, Mr. Crenshaw. God bless you for not giving up. Those families are the reason I keep talking, not for myself." I am an old man who has lost everything that mattered and gained nothing but knowledge that nobody wants. But those families deserved answers. Their dead deserved to be found. And the living, the hikers and campers and families who drive up those mountain roads every autumn with their children in the back seat, they deserve to know what waits for them if they wander too far from the marked trail. The SBI evacuated the next morning. The entire operation was classified within a week. No report was released. No warnings were issued. The mountains of western North Carolina continued to welcome tourists and hikers and campers, none of whom had any idea what lived in the deep hollows above them. In November 2002, 15 years after Lily was taken, a call came from the medical examiner's office in Raleigh. A set of remains had been found by a trail crew in a remote section of Pisgah, 6 miles from our old campsite. The remains were skeletal. They belonged to a female child between 6 and 8 years old at time of death. I drove to Raleigh in 4 hours. I remember nothing about the drive, not the highway, not the traffic, not the weather, not the radio, which was probably playing something from the country station I always had it tuned to. I arrived at the medical examiner's office and sat in my truck for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make my hands stop shaking, trying to make my legs work well enough to carry me inside. The building was modern, institutional, built to process grief efficiently. Soft colors, indirect lighting, tissue boxes on every surface. I sat in a conference room with fluorescent lights and industrial carpet, and a woman in a white coat, whose name I heard and immediately forgot. She told me with practiced gentleness that she had probably learned in a seminar about delivering bad news, that DNA analysis confirmed the remains were Lily's. She showed me the dental records comparison. She pointed at markers on a computer screen and explained terms I did not understand and did not want to understand. She said the word match several times. She described the condition of the remains and the estimated timeline and the injuries documented in the forensic analysis. She used words like peri-mortem and blunt force and instantaneous. I heard them the way you hear sounds underwater, distant, muffled, belonging to someone else's nightmare. My daughter had been dead since the night she was taken. 15 years I had been searching for her, and she had been gone from the first hour. The injuries on her skeleton matched every other set of remains I had found in those mountains. Crushing trauma to the ribcage, fractures to the long bones consistent with extreme twisting force, catastrophic damage to the skull from a single impact of such violence that the medical examiner said it would require force equivalent to a car striking a pedestrian at highway speed. Except there was no car, there was no weapon, there were only hands. Massive hands that left their impression on the bones of my 7-year-old daughter, the way a potter's fingers leave marks on clay. She had not suffered long. The forensic anthropologist believed death was nearly instantaneous from the skull fracture. She told me that as if speed makes death acceptable when it visits a child in the dark on a mountaintop while her parents sleep 40 yards away. They gave me a box, a small white box containing what was left of Lily Rose Crenshaw. It weighed almost nothing, 7 pounds and 3 ounces when she was born. 46 pounds the last time I held her, the last time she threw her arms around my neck and pressed her face into my shoulder and said, "I love you, Daddy." And now what remained of her fit in a box I could hold in one hand. I carried it to my truck with both hands because she deserved that. She deserved to be held properly, even now, especially now. I sat in the parking lot for 3 hours, holding the box against my chest, rocking back and forth the way you rock a baby, saying her name over and over until the words lost all meaning and became just breath and grief and the sound of a father's heart finally irreversibly breaking. I buried Lily beside my mother at Cove Creek Baptist Church. Karen came for the service. We stood at the grave together for the first time in 14 years. She looked older. Her hair had gone gray at the temples. She wore a black dress and held a single white rose and did not say much. There was nothing left to say. That was 22 years ago. I am 74 now. My knees are bad. My back is worse. I cannot hike those mountains the way I used to, but I still drive to the trailhead some evenings and sit in my truck with the windows down, listening to the forest. I still hear things. On certain nights when the air is cold and still and the wind comes down off the ridgeline from the north, I hear those deep vocalizations echoing through the hollows. The things that took my daughter are still there, still hunting, still watching. The government knows. The SBI knows. The Forest Service and the Park Service know. They have the classified footage from the 2000 operation. They have my 93 pages of documentation. They have the forensic reports from 9 sets of human remains showing identical patterns of violence. And they have chosen silence. They have chosen to let people keep hiking those trails and camping in those campgrounds because the truth would cause panic, and panic is bad for tourism, and tourism is money, and money is the only god this country actually worships. Since Lily's disappearance in 1987, I have documented 23 additional missing persons cases in the Grandfather Mountain and Pisgah Forest region that match the pattern. 23 people who walked into those mountains and never came back. 23 families who deserve the truth. I petitioned the North Carolina State Legislature in 2010 to require mandatory warning signs at trailheads in the affected areas. The petition was denied. I filed Freedom of Information requests for the SBI's classified field report. Denied. I was visited in 2004 by 2 men in dark suits who told me, politely but unmistakably, that continued public discussion of my experiences would result in consequences. I told them to get off my property. They left. They have not come back. But I know they keep track of me, the same way the things on the mountain keep track of everything that moves through their territory. I am 74 years old. My daughter is buried in the red clay of Watauga County. She should be 44. She should have a family of her own by now. Children who would call me granddaddy and sit on my porch and listen to stories about the mountains. Instead, she has been in the ground for 22 years, and the thing that put her there is still alive, still marking its territory, still watching from the laurel hells and the rhododendron thickets and the deep hollows where no light reaches. This is my story. I have been telling it for 37 years. Nobody has listened. Newspapers stopped printing my name. Television stopped returning my calls. The internet calls me a crazy old man. The government pretends I do not exist, but I exist. And Lily existed. And Curtis Felton and every other soul whose bones I pulled from those mountains existed. They had names and families and lives that were taken from them by something that considers every human being in its territory to be exactly one thing: an intruder, a trespasser. Pray, if you are planning to hike in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina, if you are planning to camp near Grandfather Mountain or in the backcountry of the Pisgah National Forest, I am begging you to be careful. Stay on marked trails. Do not hike alone. Do not camp in isolated areas. And if you smell something foul on the evening breeze, something that smells like death and wet hide and ancient rot, do not investigate it. Do not follow it. Turn around. Get in your car. Drive away and do not look back, because the thing that killed my daughter is still out there. It was here before the trails, before the campgrounds, before the Blue Ridge Parkway, before the Cherokee, before anything human set foot on this continent, and it regards you with the same cold hatred that my grandfather felt in that laurel thicket on Roan Mountain over 100 years ago. I keep my porch light on every night. I keep my rifle loaded. I keep listening to the sounds that come down from the mountain after midnight, and I keep remembering a 7-year-old girl in a purple corduroy jacket who tried to tell us something was watching from the trees. She knew. She tried to warn us, and we told her it was her imagination and put her to bed and fell asleep and let the mountain take her. I will carry that failure to my grave, which at 74 will not be long now. And when they put me in the ground beside my mother and my daughter at Cove Creek Baptist Church, I hope someone has the decency to keep telling this story, because the mountains do not care about our grief. The mountains do not care about our investigations or our classified reports or our freedom of information requests. The mountains were here 1 billion years before us, and they will be here 1 billion years after, and whatever lives in them will still be hunting. My name is Dale Everett Crenshaw. My daughter was Lily Rose Crenshaw. She was taken from me on October 17th, 1987. I told the truth about what happened. I have been telling it for 37 years, and I will tell it with my last breath. I want to leave you with one final thing. A few years ago, maybe 2020 or 2021, I was sitting on my porch at dusk. The mountains were doing that thing they do in the evening where the ridges go from green to blue to purple as the light dies. It was October, 30-some years after Lily was taken. The air smelled like wood smoke and turning leaves and that particular sweetness that the Blue Ridge gets in autumn, like the whole forest is exhaling one last warm breath before winter locks it down. I had my rifle across my lap. I had a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. I was just sitting there the way I sit there every evening, watching the tree line, listening to the forest settle into its nighttime rhythms. Owls warming up, the last birds going quiet, the distant sound of the creek behind the house. And then I smelled it, faint, coming from the north, from the mountain. That smell. After 30-some years, I would know it in my sleep. I know it the way a soldier knows the smell of gunpowder or a surgeon knows the smell of a cauterized wound. It is burned into the part of my brain that will be the last to die. I picked up my rifle and stood. My knees cracked. My back protested. I am not the man I was in 1987. I cannot run through laurel thickets barefoot anymore. I cannot hike for 8 hours into the backcountry. I am 74 years old, and my body is a catalog of everything those mountains have cost me. But I stood there on my porch, and I stared at the tree line, and the tree line stared back. And for just a moment, maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10, I saw something. A shape between 2 hemlocks, maybe 50 yards away, at the edge of where my property meets the national forest. Tall, dark, motionless, watching me the way my grandfather described being watched near Roan Mountain over a century ago, with that cold, patient, ancient hatred of something that considers you a temporary inconvenience on land it has owned since before your species learned to walk upright. I raised my rifle. I put my eye to the scope, and the shape was gone. Not moving away, not running, just gone, like it had never been there, like the mountain had absorbed it back into itself. I stood on that porch for another 2 hours. The smell faded. The forest sounds returned. A whippoorwill started up near the creek. The world went back to normal, the way it always does, the way it always has, as if nothing happened, as if the monsters go back under the bed when the sun comes up, and the civilized world resumes its comfortable lie that we are the dominant species on this planet and nothing out there can touch us. But I know better. I have known better for 37 years, and standing on my porch that evening, holding a rifle I am no longer strong enough to fire accurately, smelling the thing that killed my daughter on the wind, I understood something with perfect clarity. It will outlast me. Whatever it is, wherever it came from, however long it has been living in those mountains, it will still be there when I am gone. It was there when my great-grandfather logged these ridges with a crosscut saw. It was there when the Cherokee walked these trails. It was there when the first humans crossed this continent 10,000 years ago and looked up at these ancient, soft, deceptive mountains and thought they were beautiful. It was there. It watched them all, and it is watching still. I do not know if anyone will remember me when I am gone. I do not know if this story will survive past the telling of it. I do not know if the government will ever release the classified footage or acknowledge what lives in the hollows of Grandfather Mountain. I do not know if the 23 families whose loved ones disappeared in those woods will ever receive the truth they deserve. But I know this. Lily Rose Crenshaw was real. She was 7 years old. She had brown curly hair and a purple corduroy jacket and a laugh that could fill a room. She was afraid of the dark, and she was right to be afraid. And she was taken from this world by something that should not exist but does. Something that lives in the oldest mountains in North America. Something that has been killing for longer than human memory. Something that will keep killing long after the last person who remembers my daughter's name has joined her in the ground. That is the truth, the whole truth. The truth I have paid for with my marriage, my career, my reputation, my health, and 37 years of my life. Do with it what you will, but do not say you were not warned. And for God's sake, stay out of those mountains after dark.